The Cuban Missile Crisis, one of the most tense and dangerous confrontations of the Cold War, brought the world to the brink of nuclear war in October 1962. This pivotal moment in history unfolded over 13 days and left an indelible mark on international relations. Let's delve into the major events, key figures, and lasting impact of the Cuban Missile Crisis. To understand the Cuban Missile Crisis, we must first grasp the context of the Cold War. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers locked in an ideological struggle. The Cold War saw a series of geopolitical tensions, proxy wars, and an arms race that escalated year by year. The formation of NATO and the Warsaw Pact divided the world into opposing camps, and both superpowers developed massive arsenals of nuclear weapons, aiming for deterrence through mutually assured destruction. In 1959, Fidel Castro led a revolution that overthrew Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista. Castro's rise to power marked a significant shift in Cuba's political landscape. Initially, Castro was not openly aligned with the Soviet Union, but as relations with the United States deteriorated, he increasingly turned to the Soviets for support. "We have stood against imperialism and declared our right to sovereignty and self-determination." Castro's alignment with the Soviet Union and his anti-American rhetoric alarmed the United States, leading to strained relations and economic sanctions. In April 1961, the United States, under President John F. Kennedy, supported an attempted invasion of Cuba by Cuban exiles. The Bay of Pigs invasion aimed to overthrow Castro, but ended in a disastrous failure, strengthening Castro's position and pushing Cuba further into the Soviet sphere. The events in Cuba have been a setback, but we will continue to support freedom and democracy throughout the world. The invasion's failure embarrassed the Kennedy administration and heightened the tension between the U.S. and Cuba, setting the stage for the crisis to come. In October 1962, American U.S. spy planes captured images of Soviet missile installations under construction in Cuba. These medium-range ballistic missiles had the capability to strike major cities across the United States, drastically altering the strategic balance. President Kennedy was faced with a dire dilemma. The presence of these missiles just 90 miles from American shores was unacceptable, but any response carried the risk of escalating into nuclear war. Kennedy convened a group of his most trusted advisors, known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council (EXCOM), to debate the course of action. Options ranged from diplomatic pressure to an outright invasion of Cuba. A surgical airstrike on the missile sites could neutralize the threat without provoking a full-scale war. But any attack on Cuba risks a Soviet response in Berlin or elsewhere. We must find a way to avoid direct military confrontation. After intense deliberations, Kennedy decided on a naval blockade or quarantine of Cuba, aiming to prevent further Soviet shipments of military equipment. On October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the nation, announcing the discovery of the missiles and the establishment of a naval blockade. "It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response." The world held its breath as Soviet ships approached the blockade line. The confrontation seemed poised to escalate into nuclear war. Behind the scenes, frantic diplomatic efforts were underway. Attorney General Robert Kennedy met secretly with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin, while United Nations Secretary General Euthant worked to mediate the crisis. "We cannot allow these missiles to remain in Cuba. This situation must be resolved peacefully, but swiftly. The Soviet Union seeks peace, but we also cannot appear to back down under threat." Through intense negotiations, a potential solution began to emerge. The U.S. would publicly declare never to invade Cuba and secretly agree to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey in exchange for the Soviet withdrawal of missiles from Cuba. On October 28, 1962, Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union would dismantle its missiles in Cuba. The crisis was averted, and the world stepped back from the brink of nuclear war. We have ordered the dismantling of the weapons, which you describe as offensive, and their return to the Soviet Union. Kennedy and Khrushchev's careful diplomacy had prevented a catastrophic conflict. However, the crisis had lasting impacts on U.S.-Soviet relations and global nuclear policy. The Cuban Missile Crisis led to significant changes in international relations. Both superpowers recognized the need for better communication and control over nuclear weapons. The establishment of the Moscow-Washington Hotline and the signing of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963 were direct outcomes of the crisis. The crisis also underscored the importance of diplomacy and the risks of brinkmanship. It remains a critical study in crisis management and the potential consequences of nuclear proliferation. Reflecting on the Cuban Missile Crisis, historians and policymakers continue to draw lessons for today's world. The events of October 1962 serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the importance of cautious, informed leadership in the face of existential threats. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a watershed moment in the Cold War. It highlighted the perils of nuclear escalation and the necessity for ongoing dialogue and arms control measures between rival superpowers. As we navigate the complexities of modern geopolitics, the lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis remain ever relevant. The careful diplomacy and measured responses that prevented disaster then continue to guide us in our pursuit of a safer, more stable world. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a turning point in history, a moment when the world came perilously close to nuclear war. Yet, it also demonstrated the power of diplomacy and the human capacity to find peaceful solutions to even the most dangerous confrontations. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most critical episodes of the Cold War. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insights into the pivotal moments that shape our world.